I am so excited to be chatting with the one, the only Micah McCaw. Thank you for joining me.
Yes, hello. Thank you. I'm happy to be here.
I am really excited that you reached out to come on the show. It's my favorite thing when people reach out to be on the show instead of me having to hunt folks down, which all podcasters do at some point or another. But it's always a thrill when people want to be on the show. And you reached out, your brand new album released this year, A Beautiful Divorce. And you're like, hey, I want to promote my new record. Can I come on one of your shows? And I was like, I do an interview show where I love interviewing musicians especially because that's how it started. Let's do it. And so here we are. And so I'm really excited to have you. Of course, I've been a guest on your podcast. You've been a guest on Screen Snark, my other podcast. You and your lovely wife do a podcast, and we're going to talk about that a little later, which is, of course, the McCaw podcast universe, inspired by the MCU, but now has gone beyond to see many universes told in full, which is very, very, very fun. And we're going to talk about that in a bit, but I want to start by talking about your brand new record, A Beautiful Divorce.
Yes.
I've been listening to this album a lot, and it very much, for me, as a music nerd, feels like a time capsule. It reminds me of the late 90s, early aughts. It reminds me of like things from like REM to like newer prog rock or indie rock. And like, it's got this kind of like folksy kind of feel to it, but like instrumentally it goes all over the place from grunge to indie to like, it doesn't really have, you have like a broad rock style, I'd say, but I don't feel like you're pigeonholed to like one kind of sound. Was that from inception with your music? Have you always kind of played that way and kind of ebbed and flowed? Does that reflect like your taste in music?
Yeah, when I was really young, I always wanted to create music that no one would ever confuse a song for another song. And now that I'm older, I think that's just like inbred. I guess that's just, and I'm sure somebody has, but I don't know, if something reminds me too much of something else I've done, I tend to move past it. And each time I do a new project or something, I try to explore something else artistically and musically.
I mean, you can see that in this record. Like, while there's definitely a musical through line from the first track, Be Enough, all the way to the end, A Beautiful Divorce, each track does have its own kind of little world to it, which is what I really love. And like, especially,
sweet.
Well, I mean, what I love about the like arc of this is it's very much a self-referential kind of reckoning with the self and the world and like the things we experience and go through. That feels very emotionally driven. Is the writing process also very emotionally driven? Are you pulling from personal experience for a lot of these tracks?
Yes. So this album, I think, well, I shouldn't say more so. They're all very personal, but I think on an emotional level, this one is much more emotional because I started writing it in September of 2020, and I just felt like that was a big paradigm shift for me as a human, looking around at the world, family, friends, and seeing maybe the way they were reacting to the pandemic or like the murder of George Floyd and stuff, and looking at them and going, why are you reacting with so much hatred to these like awful things? Why is your first reaction to COVID, oh, what happened to our rights? And why is it not like, how can we help people? Right. Especially when I come from a community of a lot of Christians. And it's like, that is right there. And that's what this album is about. It's specifically about the church. And the response politically to all this stuff was frankly disgusting for a lot of churches.
Right. And
so to see them respond not with love first, but hate or like, even fear. And oddly, they're claiming not to be afraid of certain things was fearful.
Right.
So it was very emotional in that way where I'm like, what are we doing here? If we're not here for love, what are we doing?
Right. I feel like all art has changed during the pandemic, right? Like everything had to evolve and shift. But there's something about music and not only how people write it, but how people experience it, I think that has shifted a lot. Like for me, I've always been an emotional music listener, but like when I lost my commute, which was my like big time to listen to music, or I lost being able to walk around, like being stuck at home and listening to music, it changed for a lot of people, especially folks like, I assume both of us, who are way more engaged music listeners. Like it's not just a passive activity. It's something that we listen to and really dive into. And it's like the depression, the isolation affects all of that mood-wise. Mm-hmm. And I feel like this album, especially a lot of the instrumentation, captures some of those moments, right? Like, especially Ghost in My House. Like, there's several tracks that I just feel like really reflect that kind of mood almost. And there's a lot of it in the tone of this record.
Yeah. I think that's all subconscious. Like, I was not set out to do that, but yeah, looking back, it's funny you even mentioning Ghost in My House. I had never looked at it through a pandemic lens, and now I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh wow, that actually, yeah, there's like something there that I hadn't explored. Like, I was, and I love that about, music, art in general. How I can write this song, and I had a very specific idea of what that meant and what it is, and then hearing you say something that's totally different, I'm like, oh, but that works. That aligns with the message of that song as well. That's cool.
I mean, I just, what I love about music like yours is that there's a lot to dig into. Like, and I think some of the best music doesn't have to be complicatedly created to have a complicated dissection, right? Like, I'm a big, noted, giant fan of Carly Rae Jepsen, who just released a new record as well. And, like, a pop star does a lot of stuff that, like, we've heard in other places, but does it on another level. But I think her music is interesting because there's more to it than just the pop sensibility. And I think, and I promise there's a through line here. What's fascinating about knowing you before I knew your music, because I hadn't listened to it until recently, is being on your show, you coming on Screen Snark, you and your wife have a very much a pop culture pop sensibility, right? Like, you're first of all, you're very warm and lighthearted and, like, very bright, and your show also very much feels that way. Even when you're not happy with a film you've watched, like, you tend to still be kind of positive and optimistic. And, like, your music, while there are messages of optimism throughout, it is not necessarily as bright as your podcast. And so it's so interesting that we can be so segmented in and different in the different arts we engage with and create. And I think that's also really fascinating. I'm curious, because I don't know the timeline. Have you been writing music longer or making the podcast longer?
Oh, music much longer. So I've been playing guitar for 21 years. And then my first album came out in 2014, but I had another band. We came out with an album in 2013. So, and then high school, those are like the pre-writing years where you're kind of writing, but you don't know how to do it yet. So, yeah, I've been doing it for a little while now. And the podcast is like 3 years old, 3.5 years old.
So a more recent thing. Have you always wanted to play music and, like, write music? Is that something that you've wanted to do since you were a kid?
Yeah, and this is like the cheesy, but it is the true answer. When I was, I believe, 5 or maybe even 4, we were driving up to my grandparents for Thanksgiving, and the song Blue Suede Shoes by Elvis Presley played on the radio, and I was like, in my head, I was like, I want to do that. I want to play that thing. And so I did, and still am.
That's amazing. I love that. It's so funny because, like, as a kid, it's strange what we're aware of and what we're not. Like, I remember very distinctly in junior high school being like, I want to be a DJ or a VJ. Like, I want to I want to be on the radio and talk to people and talk about music and talk about, these subjects that people really like. And now here I am. I've been doing it for almost 10 years. Like, but podcasting didn't exist when I was a kid, but essentially it's the same thing, more or less, right?
Yeah.
It grew from that. And, like, it's just wild. Like, so often we see in TV and movies, like, oh yeah, when I grow up, I want to be an astronaut or a doctor or like a lawyer. But the reality is, kids, I think, are more complex than that. And, like, sure, there are plenty of people who grow up who want to do that. But I think that, like I know, I have friends who were like, I had a friend who was like, at 4, he's like, I want to code video games. I'm like, when I was 4, I didn't know that you coded video games. I just assumed they just came out in one piece. Like, I had no idea. So that kind of those kinds of backstories always amuse me. You mentioned, playing in bands in high school and stuff. Were you in any, like, marching band or, like, did any school curriculars that were music related?
I did do a little bit of band. I played the trumpet in, like, middle school, and I did do choir in high school. But right. It was always like, I want to be a rock guitar player. I mean, when Elvis is the inspiration, and then when you're like 15 and you discover a little band called Van Halen and you're a guitar player,
Yeah.
your course gets set pretty clearly.
Yeah, I mean, I surmise we're around the same age, and so like in the '90s especially, there were just tons of like frontman, and I say front men because like there are plenty of great front women too, but I just feel like the media always pushed forward the men more than the women. I feel like there's less of that now, but like you think about David Lee Roth and like Steve Tyler and Mick Jagger, or even Stevie Nicks and like all of these powerful people who are in the front of the entire band, like controlling the flow of everything. Did you ever dream that you would be a solo artist, kind of writing, recording, and like doing everything? Or did you see your path more with a group or with a band?
That's an interesting question.
Or was it not that clear of a vision? You just knew you wanted to make music?
Yeah, I knew for sure I wanted to play guitar. And then as I got older, I was like, oh, maybe I can sing. And then I did, when you're someone who creates something like a songwriter, that kind of just starts happening. At least that's my experience with it. But like the band I mentioned, who we released an album in 2013, I was the guitar player in that band. And I've been in another band where I was the guitar player, so, but I've always enjoyed, once I got older and was doing it and playing shows and stuff like that, I enjoyed being able to have the control of like, this is my music, this is how I want to present it. But I like it's really fun when you can do both, because then it kind of is like I can just sit there and only play guitar and focus on one thing and just playing with other people. Whereas the other one's like it's it's a lot more stressful to put on a show when it's you and four other people and you're trying to like play an album that you wrote and you're gonna sing and all of that stuff.
Right. I want to talk a little bit more focused about Beautiful Divorce a little bit. So how long were you working on this record? It came out this year in November, but how long had you been working on it prior to release?
So yeah, so I'm pretty sure I started writing it in September of 2020, and then I think I want to say by January I had the songs written, and during that period I also went through and I demoed the entire album, and I wrote like, using software and stuff, I wrote like basic drum parts, harmonies. Like I kind of did the whole thing, and then I presented it to Jeremy Oliveira, who's a friend, and he is the guy who produced the album and mixed it.
Right.
And then we went in, and then in July of 2021, we started recording the album. By January of this year, we were completely done with everything, and I had the album on my computer sitting there, and then it was a matter of just figuring out how I wanted to release it, when, and doing all of the stuff that's not fun.
Yeah.
It's like, actual, now
like, prep.
Yeah, it's like, okay, we caught up and now it's the boring part. But yeah.
Did you feel that the process for writing this album was faster or slower than previous records? Do you feel like it was different in any way from previous records?
I'm kind of a quick songwriter. I don't really relate too much to, oh my gosh, what's the term? When you can't write, writer's block. I don't really, I usually just power through that. So, and that's not to say that anyone is, that's just how my brain works. I just like have to power through it, even if it's bad. I can't like, but I would say what was different about this was it was a very specific and clear message running through every song, and it was written for a specific group of people. Mm-hmm. And it was so influenced by what I was seeing and experiencing politically and living where I live and all of that stuff. Whereas a lot of my other music is typically, more like, hey, this is how I feel. This is my life. And this was much more political and like I'm saying a message and like putting it on a megaphone is kind of how I at least feel about the album. I don't know if that's what listeners think about it, but that's how I view it.
I mean, do you think that's part of just getting older as well as like living in the pandemic that really kind of made that change happen?
Yeah, I think being older, I was more equipped with like handling these sorts of things and also recognizing them. I think as a white person, like during 2020, I came to a reckoning of like my experience is so different from a lot of people, and realizing like, oh, I have had these biases, or like I mean, I'm trying to word this correctly, but there was just such a reckoning with like whiteness, I guess. And if you were white, it was like it was your responsibility and still is to go, hey, I need to see that I do have the upper hand in an American society, and I need to work hard to balance that scale. So something like that, it's like as I'm older, I don't have the skills to understand that in high school. I don't think, anyway.
Right. I was a little shit in high school.
It's a hard thing to explain in a way that makes sense and isn't like. But what I'm trying to say is, well, yeah, I think I explained it. Complicated.
Sure. I mean, well, I don't think there's any right answer also to like a writing process or how you perceive the world or how you perceive, like you're going to perceive what you perceive. It's how you then react to the world and how you interact with the world. And I think like it's funny getting to know you through this album and getting to know you just through the internet and through your podcast. Like I feel like I have a more complete picture of who you are. Who you are on the podcast is a person. We're all personas on our podcast, right? We are a version of ourselves. But I feel like after listening to all your music now, I have a better, broader understanding of who you are, maybe a more intimate understanding. And I think that just comes from listening to music. I think we can be open and intimate with our audiences. And I, on this podcast, since it's the one that I've done the longest and the one that's been the most of a personal project because it's just me chatting with other folks.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like there are avenues where we can get more personal, but I feel like there's something that you can put into music that just you can't express in other mediums. I'm also an audiophile, so like I love music and I love sound, but I feel like there's there's a rawness to like putting something into musical form that doesn't exist in other places. Other people might disagree, but that's just kind of my perception.
Yeah, no, I think you have something to that because there's like that combination of the lyrics and then the sonics that are going into your ears. And, that's a special experience. I mean, I think film gets in that same vein, or it can at least, where, you see, sometimes you can see an image and you don't know what it means. You have no reference for it, but like it's so powerful, just that image.
Yeah, for sure. I'm curious if you have any, like, listening to your music, of course, I hear clear influences that I could guess, but, like, are there people that, like, when you were a kid, you grew up, like, you mentioned Elvis earlier, and, like, I want to be Elvis, which turns out, like, as you get older, maybe that's not so great to be Elvis.
Right.
It sounds like it wasn't so great for him sometimes.
As a 4-year-old, cool.
Yeah, right? But are there any, like, clear influences that like you kind of looked to as you grew up and as you started to write music that you're like, I love this, or I pull a lot of my taste from that?
Yeah, I mean, I am near and dear to Switchfoot. I will always love them from now until forever. They're the best. So they're a huge influence on me, and I particularly like how John Foreman, the songwriter, can talk about things in a way that's intelligent. But it's not like pandering, at least not in my opinion, to any type of person. So I really like that, and I've always been inspired by that sort of approach to songwriting. As far as this album, though, I think there's a pretty strong Radiohead influence.
Yeah, for sure.
And then of course, but the Deer Hunter.
Yeah,
that those. Radiohead and the Deer Hunter are pretty in my blood. I love both of those bands. So I think the progressive rock and then like the political Radiohead, like you kind of put that together, then you add a little Switchfoot, and I think you got a beautiful divorce.
Since you did write all the music and the lyrics, do you find that one is more difficult than the other? And what's your process? Do you like end up with the sonics first and then you put lyrics to it, or the other way around? Like, what's your writing process? How do the songs take form? I
don't think one is easier than the other. I think it really depends on the situation. I mean, since I am first and foremost a guitar player, the songs usually start with me just messing around on my acoustic guitar, sometimes my electric, and then it's just, humming along or whatever. But on this album, there are a couple of weirdos, because you have like Dark Waters and Millions, Billions, Trillions, Zillions, and those songs, it was weird because I wrote like all of the the basic like core of the song, and then I would, take a walk or something and listen to it and write the melody and the lyrics. And I don't often do that. But they were in such weird time signatures that I couldn't figure out how to play it and then write lyrics, so I had to figure that whole thing out.
The process of writing music to me, as someone who's written lyrics once and has done nothing with them and can't write music at all, just seems like a magic trick to me. Like pulling something like this out of thin air, it almost just feels like such a magic trick to me. How do you know when a song is done? What's that moment that you're like, this is finished, I can move on to the next thing?
Well, okay. I think I love the magic trick. I do love that, but I do think sometimes that can make people think, I don't know. I think that, I know this is not what you were saying, but I think that
Right.
that can sometimes make it seem like musicians just kind of like come up with this stuff.
Right.
You know?
Which is not the case, yeah.
And it's like, I tend to think, let's say I write 10 songs and 9 of them are bad, but the 10th one's really good. I like to think like those 9 songs like paved the way to get to that one really good one.
Sure.
But coupling that with when is a song done, I kind of segment it like I like to write the basics of it. So that'd usually be, the guitar and then, verse, chorus, lyrics kind of a thing. And then it's like, okay, the song's written, but it's not like ready to release or anything like that. And then that's where the magic of recording and figuring it out or playing with people, that's when you start discovering it. But I would say in the studio, there's usually a moment in every song. This is what I've experienced. And this is where I think you're right on the magic. Definitely. Where you're going and, you got your bass, your drums, all your guitars, you got harmonies and stuff like that. And then it's like, there's something missing. And then, someone says like, let's try like accordion, or let's try to, sometimes it's even like, can we kill the drums in chorus 2 or something? And then you do that. And then all of a sudden you listen to the song and you're like, it's done. All we got to do is mix it. Like that was the magic. Like once we did that thing, it went into the stratosphere. It's different now. That's my experience with it. Usually there's one thing that happens that just changes everything.
So when a friend, someone you've met online, sends you their album, goes, hey, here's my new album, you should check it out. I am the kind of person who, in that moment, assumes it can go one of 2 ways. It's something that's not for me, or it is something for me. It's something highly produced, or it's something more akin to a garage band, something like they scrape together because this is like the concept, right? There are a wide ranges of ways to record music. And so when you sent me your album and I had zero experience with your music, I'm like, oh, I wonder what this will be like. I don't know. Is Micah more of a garage band kind of guy? Does he have the production suite? Like the accessibility to tech to record music now is so much, the bar is so much lower now than it ever was, right? Like anybody can get some really quality microphones, DIs, everything.
I mean, you and I are talking through like amazing mics, both of us right now. I mean, that just speaks to it.
Yeah. And like when I first heard Be Enough and heard the production value, I was like, this is incredible. Like because you never know. I have a friend, Dan Purcell, who I adore, who's been a guest on this show, who does pop music. And like when someone who is like half your age says they're doing pop music, I'm like, oh, okay, let's see what you got. And then he sends me this fully produced record. And I'm like, that he produced himself in his room. I'm like, how the hell did you do that? Like, it goes back to my brain perceiving it the magic trick. And I had no idea what I was getting into. And I was just so impressed with the production value and just how smooth everything sounded, except when you didn't want it to sound smooth and you wanted it to sound crunchy. Like it all felt very purposeful. Does that come from the production, the final sweep, the recording? Like, did you find that kind of fine-tuned sound in the recording sessions?
Well, so again, I got to give a lot of credit to Jeremy Oliveira, who produced and mixed it, because he also engineered it. So, he's setting up the mics in the studio and making sure everything sounds good. So I have 3 full-length albums, and my second album was my attempt at, like, I just wanted to make a rock album. Right. And it has 14 songs, and it came out in a wonderful weekend for a music to come out that you wanted to perform live March 13th, 2020. And so I played the album one time and then stayed home and yeah. But it was like really energetic, and it was kind of like throw every idea, go crazy. I mean, I'm very proud of that album. I think it's great, but I think that album led to this one where I think I was a lot more intentional with, like you're saying, you know, there's a song on here called Tax Me that is recorded in my bedroom on my iPhone, and it's a minute and a half, and I believe it ends with me putting my guitar down and shutting a door. So it has like, I think there was something about the message where I did want there to be aspects of low quality even. But then, of course, when you juxtapose that with high quality, you can go back and forth. And I think that created something a little more cohesive than I've had in any of my previous albums.
Yeah, I have to imagine that comes with just experience, right? Kind of knowing what you've done and then moving on to what you can do. Like, you just kind of, well, I did this before and now I know I can do this, so let's try that kind of a thing.
Yeah, and I think it helps when you have voices in your, whether it's your friend groups or the people you're collaborating with, that can also, that you're willing to hear what they have to say. So, you know, like I said, I kind of demoed out the drums and the bass, but then Grayson Phelps, the bass player, and Evan Coons, the drummer, they came in and it was like, well, you guys are the ones that play these instruments. So you need to take my parts that are written by a guitar player and make them a bass part and a drum part. And then I need to trust that process and let go of the ego of being like, well, I wrote that part.
Right.
And you can't change it, you know. But then sometimes going, actually, but in the chorus, like, you got to keep that bass line, you know, that sort of a thing. So it's like that weird push and pull.
Is it hard to let go of that, to like let go of your baby essentially and let other people play with it? Or do you like that collaborative kind of creative process and can mostly let that go?
I've gotten better at it. I've gotten a lot better.
Such an honest answer. I love that.
Yeah. But I do think with this album, I was much more, I mean, I don't know what they would say, but I'm pretty sure I was much more like, you know, you guys are the ones that play these instruments and play them excellently. So take my non-drum part and take the essence of it and make it a drum part.
I love that. I think the strength to being a solo singer-songwriter and musician is that you have to accept help, right? Like everyone wants to do everything themselves, and some people do. But I think the way a collaboration flourishes if you let other people share in your work and let them help you build it to what it can really be, right? Because you may not see something that someone else sees.
Yeah, and I think a lot of creatives, and I think this is kind of good. Like, this is part of the whole dance of being an artist. We all think we're geniuses, but the fact of the matter is very few of us are. And so if you can rely on other people as well that are, you know, if you're excellent at guitar or you're excellent at, like, shooting movies, but maybe you're not good at telling the story, like, okay, maybe I should get someone who's good at writing stories. And, you know, well, I mean, when you think of filmmaking, think of someone like Martin Scorsese, who is probably my favorite director, and he doesn't really do much writing. And he does do some writing, but he's usually collaborating with the writer. Whereas then you have like a Paul Thomas Anderson who is writing and directing and kind of doing it all in that regard. So relying on other, it's like if Martin Scorsese has to rely on other writers, then I can rely on people who are experts too, because he's also way better at that than I am at this. So we can just get rid of that ego, you know?
Yeah. I mean, it's funny you bring up movies. I think what's really great about your show, to shift gears a little bit, is like it comes from such an honest place that you and your wife are just like, we love movies. We're big film fans, but I want to see the big picture, right? Because a lot of other movie podcasts just look at a movie, and you do that on a more micro level, but on the macro level, like covering entire cinematic universes, piecemeal, you know, episode by episode, but still doing things mostly in order, only interrupting for the latest MCU film.
Right. Right.
I love that idea. Like when I got to guest on your John Wick episode at the start of that trilogy, which will now have a fourth movie very soon, which I'm very excited for. Was that that was the clear plan. Like, that was the mission statement. Like, if we're going to do a podcast about movies, let's start with the MCU. Let's start with this cinematic universe and then look at other cinematic universes. Was that always the idea from the beginning?
Yes. And actually, so what we did, because we knew doing, at the time, I think it would have been 23 straight Marvel movies was going to be really tough. Even though we do like a lot of them, it's like, that's just hard.
Yeah.
So what we did even from the get-go was we broke it up into the phases. So we did phase 1, then we did Mad Max, then we did phase 2, then we did Shrek, then phase 3. And then it was like, now we're caught up. When they come out in theaters, we'll go see them and review them. But then we can cover, the Keanu saga, which was Bill and Ted to The Matrix to John Wick, They just have to have a trilogy. That's the rule. Trilogy and theatrical releases.
So have you had a favorite cinematic universe that you've covered so far? I know. It's like picking your favorite kid. I know.
Well, the only one that I would give 10s for every movie is the Before trilogy, the Richard Linklater Before trilogy, that was really fun to cover because it's like, this isn't really, like, these are not action movies. They're not blockbusters. Yeah. They're romance movies, and they're just about as good as movies get. I'm getting excited just thinking about them. But that one was really fun. And also the M. Night Shyamalan superhero trilogy, I think is brilliant, and I make my arguments whether people agree with them or not. But just the simple idea of waiting like 15 years to have a twist like that where a movie's connected, that alone, I'm on board.
Yeah. I mean, whether you like him or not, he is definitely doing something interesting, right? And I think that's what stands out. The movies that I love the most, whether you love them or hate them, if they're doing interesting things, I was just on a podcast as of when we're recording talking about Sonic the Hedgehog 2. One movie away from getting that trilogy and sticking it in the McCaw podcast universe.
I haven't seen either one, so I've missed out on those.
So the thing about Sonic 2 is that it couldn't have existed without Sonic 1, because Sonic 1 laid groundwork and set a world that is similar to the video games, but not the same. But then the second movie is just full of video game bullshit that you couldn't get away with if you didn't set the groundwork. And I think that's really brilliant. And I think what a lot of big, flashy pop culture movies don't do, and the reason the MCU has had as much success as it has, beyond using Iron Man to launch it and getting a good lead that was perfect for the role, is like they had a couple of single movies and then it culminated with the Avengers, right? You brought the team together. I think good cinematic universes do world setting before they worry about anything else. It's why John Wick is so good. The first movie is almost all world setting. It's incredible action and other things, but like it's all world setting. You're getting to see the hotel. You're getting to see his home. You get to see the inciting incident. It's all world building. And then that way, John Wick 2 is just off to the races, being bonkers from the minute it starts. And same with the third. Do you find that the stronger universes that you engage in do that, start with like the world setting instead of just kind of jumping in from the beginning?
Well, I think what I find preferential is I wouldn't say I disagree with you, truly,
right.
But it might sound like I'm about to. But I think like John Wick falls into this. It's like you have a great story. It's got a beginning, middle, and an end. It's John Wick. It can stop there. It's done if it has to be. But then throughout, they've peppered all these great little things that then they make John Wick 2, and you go, oh man, they've really expanded it. And then you watch John Wick 1, and you're like, oh, this is kind of like all in the DNA of this movie. That's really interesting.
Yeah.
And so that's kind of, to me, I mean, I get frustrated when movies sometimes call their shot of like, we know there's going to be a lot of these. And then, then they spend their time only world building. But I know that's not what you're saying.
No. But you're not wrong. Like, I mean, the reason I think that the DCEU movies, the ones that were setting up Justice League, failed is like Superman was more concerned about setting up the world than being Superman. And it short-shrifted Henry Cavill. It short-shrifted a lot of the storytelling. And so, like, whereas then we get to movies like Birds of Prey or the Suicide Squad, the second Suicide Squad movie, like those are just being fun in the space and still telling a good story, like you're saying, with a beginning, a middle, and end. And I think, it's why Shazam was so good. Like, I think that those films that just wanted to tell this specific story did much better. And I think the problem is the MCU, which is where you started, I think people took the wrong ideas from it, right? The
Oh,
MCU worked
yes.
because
Yeah.
they laid the groundwork, but it also worked because Robert Downey Jr. rediscovered himself in that role. It was a very well made first film, and like whether it's aged well now or not, it's hard to say. But like I think that the laying the groundwork and slow rolling it was a big part of it, but it was also incredible casting, good writers, a great director. All of that stuff really made it happen. And then DC went, "Oh, we can do that too. Let's get Zack Snyder, who's done a bunch of really interesting comic book movies, and give him Superman." And it clearly didn't work for a lot of people. And I think that's the danger. I think what's fascinating about your show and that you start with the MCU is now you kind of get to comment on the MCU every so often, like you just did not that long ago, Black Panther, Wakanda Forever, which was fantastic. Like, but think about like the reason Black Panther is good. Well, there's a lot of reasons, right? Of course, we want to see it because we lost Chadwick Boseman, who's an incredible actor and did incredible things with that role. But also, the first movie did something so unique and interesting, and then they had to make a sequel to that, right?
Mm-hmm.
And that was just a good movie, as opposed to the thing I love about the Black Panther movies is you could watch them without the rest of the MCU and pretty much know everything that's going on. You might be a little lost at the beginning of Black Panther, but like Shang-Chi, I love that film because it's just a kick-ass movie in the MCU. It's not trying to set up the bigger picture. It's why I ended up really enjoying She-Hulk, because it was concerned with being itself, right? And like I think that's the biggest thing that the early movies did too. Iron Man was just trying to be Iron Man. Thor was just trying to be Thor. They were all very different movies that then led to the Avengers, which then kind of led to some of the homogeny that we see often now. And I think it's a really fascinating case study that then you guys are using to like compare to, the new Nightmare series and all of that. Like, I think it's interesting that you use that lens to then look at these other franchises that existed before the MCU, and yet you can kind of still use that same lens to kind of analyze it.
MCU has kind of dominated culture, and so it's like I can't help but make comparisons to it. I'm actually glad that you like that we talk about it so much, because sometimes I'm like, oh, here I go, I'm comparing the good, the bad, and the ugly to the MCU. What am I doing with my life? But that's like when we finish up Nightmare on Elm Street. I don't know when this episode's coming out, but the next series we're covering is the Dollars trilogy, the Sergio Leone westerns.
Oh, that's awesome.
Yeah, and that's really interesting too, because those are like the oldest movies we've covered, and they're a series, but they're not a series at all like the MCU.
Right.
These are not connected in any way beyond like he's the man with no name. But there's no references to previous events or future events or anything like that. And it's like, how does that work?
Yeah.
And first of all, it works brilliantly. But spoiler alert when y'all listen to that.
Well, I think you bring up an interesting point before too. Is like some of the strongest trilogies start with a movie that wasn't going to be a trilogy. Like a lot of people like to rag on The Matrix, but I think the second and third movies have a lot of really strong points. I think they had some really interesting ideas. The movies ultimately weren't as good as I think they could have been, because they were definitely trying to make a franchise at that point. But like the reason that those movies have any strength is because the first movie was so much its own thing, so different, and no intent for more. And then you get to do something like the most recent Matrix film that just kind of pisses in the face of the first film a little bit.
I know.
In a way that's really brilliantly done, right? And like I think that franchise, when talking about Keanu Reeves' career, is like it's just like it spans his career in a way.
I know
that his other films
so
don't,
good.
and it's so fascinating to follow that through line.
The other thing for people who don't listen is, sometimes we got hot takes, and sometimes Jordan and I argue too, because I went through all 4 Matrix movies, and I was like a dissertation on why that like each of those movies is actually not good but great.
Yeah.
And sometimes she didn't agree, and I think all 4, including 3 Matrix movies, like that they're all amazing. I love those movies, and the new one, oh man.
It's like I think what's interesting about your format is that you get to take these detours, right? All of it is the same format. You're using the same format for everything, but you take these little detours style-wise, setting-wise, time period-wise, and I think that's what, for me as a listener, keeps it fresh, is that. And then, like I said, between A Nightmare on Elm Street 5 and then and A Nightmare on Elm Street 4, Black Panther: Wakanda Forever is right in the middle there, and like
yeah.
it allows you to kind of, if you like film in general and you're not really too picky about what's being discussed, it allows you to kind of keep it fresh and change it up. And so like every time a new Marvel movie comes out, you're like, all right, we can take a break, we can go on this thing, right? Especially since some of the film franchises that you're engaging in are incredibly long. There's so many movies in some of them.
Well, and yeah, that's the other thing is it's not just the MCU. Whenever a franchise we have covered makes a new entry, we go see it, and we, like, so I at the end of this month, December, we'll be covering Puss in Boots: The Last Wish. And then in a couple months we'll be covering Scream 6, so it makes it kind of nice too, because then it forces us to go to the theaters so much, which I love.
And check out new stuff. I think it's a really great idea. I encourage folks to check it out along with your album. I really dig it. I'm always amazed at the ideas and the log lines that folks come up with for podcasts, right? Because like this show is pretty straightforward. It's a casual conversation. It's like the person's autograph, right? But like ultimately it's an interview show, and there are plenty of these on the internet. But like I think the podcasts that have the greatest strengths are the ones that have a bit, right? It's more complicated than that, but at its core, it's a bit, right? It's a thing that sets it apart. And I think you can have a podcast that you love, that you do great things with, that's part of the thousands and millions of podcasts that have the same idea. But like, I think if you really want to stand out, you have to go in going, all right, what's our deal? What's our thing, right? And I think there's a little bit to that to music too, right? I'm sure from album to album, your style, as you've said, has changed a little, but at the core of it, you're like, I know what I'm good at, and I know what people come to my music for. And like, so how do I incorporate that into this new thing and make it stand out? What's my shtick for this new record? Like we discussed, the new record is very much a time capsule of living through the pandemic and living, what's gone on since 2020. And I think that's what is one of the greatest strengths of this record. It's not just Micah's view of the pandemic and politically what's gone on and all this stuff, but also the world's view, right? And your reaction to it. And it both makes it personal yet broad at the same time. Yeah.
And I mean, speaking of log lines, I was able to fine tune this since I had the album since January. I have a log line for the album, which is A Beautiful Divorce is about how the evangelical American church needs to divorce their patriotism from their faith and put the teachings of Christ above their love of a country and a political party. And so I wonder how much my podcasting actually got me to like, oh yeah, I can make this like a pitch almost.
Well, and I think it's important to know that, like, I mean, also like thinking about the modern world we live in, religion is often, so much terrible stuff is done in the name of religion. And so for you to want to like call attention to that and be like, hey, look, being religious isn't the problem. It's doing these shitty things in the name of it. That's the problem.
Yes. Yeah.
And it's just incredible work. But also like, I wouldn't consider your album a Christian rock record or like in that genre, right? But like, the fact that
I think some wouldn't want it to be heard,
right? And so, like, what I think is really interesting is you're using your own faith and the faith of the world and the things that you see to kind of really tell this story that I just don't hear a lot of other albums, especially now in I don't want to say post-pandemic because it's still going on, but like in this part of the pandemic. There was a lot of stuff that was very much the same, trying to tell the story of the pandemic, but this feels like it's breaking outside of that because you are really trying to encapsulate not only your personal experiences, but how you view the world and how the world viewed you.
Yeah. I mean, I think you nailed it. You paid attention when you were listening.
I mean, I can't help but actively listen to stuff. Like, I listen to stuff on my commute, but I'm rarely doing something else. It's usually if I'm listening to music, I'm listening to it. But I'm also a big music nerd, so it comes from that too. This album has just came out on November 4th. Obviously, like all songwriters, I'm sure you never stop working or writing. Do you find that there is a grace period after releasing a record that you're like, all right, I'm going to take a break, I'm not going to write anything? Or do you just keep working as stuff comes to you?
I have in the past been nuts, and I just always am writing, but I really feel like after this, I just felt like that for the first time as a songwriter, I felt like I caught up. Mm-hmm. Well, I mean, I kind of felt like that in the second album too, but it was like the second album had a lot of songs that were old that I finally got to record, and then it was like, okay, I'm gonna write an album from scratch, and then it's like, okay, I've done that, and I've been thinking a lot about 2023. What are my goals going to be as a musician, and I've landed on that I really wanted to spend some time like honing musicianship and not try to have some goal of like, okay, I'm going to release an album or I'm going to write an album or something. So there's some goals that I have as a musician that I want to achieve next year to take me to the next level, and maybe that will open up a new door so that I can write a new type of music for me, So that I think that's where I'm at right now musically.
That sounds almost very healthy for an artist who's creating music, right? It sounds
I
very
think so.
like it sounds very focused, and I'm joking a little, but there is this thing where people who create feel almost tortured by the things they're creating, right? Like you have to keep making, you cannot stop.
Mm-hmm.
But to healthily, I know I'm a workaholic myself, and so like to healthily be like, I have this goal, I can take this time, and like I think I can get there is brilliant, and I really admire that. I think it's really kind of brilliant.
I'll still be writing a few songs for patrons, sure. But not for like the public yet,
Yeah.
So.
But it kind of gives you this safety net, though, to noodle, right? And to like be like, here's an experiment. You're paying me. Here you go. Chew on this experiment for a little while, right?
Yeah.
The last question I want to ask, and I've been asking pretty much since the pandemic started, and who knows when it'll end, is obviously the album is one of the greatest things to come out of the pandemic. But like one of the things that I wanted to talk about the pandemic was hard, of course, for everyone on a multitude of different levels. But I always like to try and focus on the good and the silver lining and like what good things came from it. So is there like something that stands out to you as like, this might not have happened if not for the pandemic? This is a really good thing to come out of this terrible time. Does anything come to mind to the forefront?
So is this like personal or
it could be
like...
personal, it could be professional, it could be broad, it could be in the world. Yeah, really the thing that you want to highlight is like a good thing that came out of this terrible time.
Well, the first thing that popped up to me was Bo Burnham's Inside.
That's a good one.
When you said that.
Yeah.
But I'm trying to think of something maybe a little more... I don't know. I think as hard as it's been, I think the reflection, like as I was talking earlier, like seeing the racial inequality in America and spending time and still continuing to spend time trying to figure out how to make that better and how to be what's the word, like anti-racist, not just I don't say these words, but like how can I actively be better. And so I think the reflection, I know that it just always seems hopeless because everyone's so loud, but having the reflection time and even just reflecting with family and like, when we got our boosters and we were finally able to see people and stuff, like being able to have those cherished moments again, I think that was positive.
Yeah. I mean, I would agree with that.
In my experience.
Yeah, I would agree with that too. I mean, I think it's very easy, especially for folks who look like us, who are white, to have glided through a lot of spaces. I wasn't unfamiliar to it being Jewish. Like I've seen persecution, I've been persecuted. Anti-Semitism, of course, is on the rise, but still, it's a different level, right? I still have a ton of privilege above people of color and other things, and so like being forced to reckon with that and then understand it and then figure out how I can help and how I can be a good listener versus being too loud or being, taking away from the point. Like all of that stuff I think is important work that we had to do. And the pandemic allowed a lot of us to do it, in a way that we might not have been able to without it. Right. And I think that is something important to focus on.
I think a lot of us would have been like, I'm too busy for this right now. Like I can't think about this, which, life is crazy for everybody. But, it's good that a lot of us were forced to, like I said earlier, like reckon with it and kind of go, no, I need to, I have to learn.
Yeah. Yes, exactly. Micah, thank you for taking the time. Thank you for reaching out. I'm so glad we connected again. I hope someday we will record another episode of your show, maybe bring you both back onto Screen Snark at some point. But this was wonderful. before we wrap up and I have you do the show sign off, I would love for you to tell folks where they can find you online and, more importantly, where they can buy your record, because I'd much rather them spend money where you want them to versus iTunes, whatever. Like, if you have a preference, like, focus point for them to go buy the record, please tell me. Of course, if you buy the record, still listen to it on Spotify. That way he gets both those bucks, you know. Spread the love. You got to do that.
Yeah, so check out the album, A Beautiful Divorce. It's just my name as the artist, Micah McCaw. If you are looking to support financially, the best way would be micahmccaw.bandcamp.com. Or you could sign up to be a patron, which is patreon.com/Micah McCaw, and I give patrons the album as well. But, you know, patrons, you know, it takes a while to get someone to a patron. So, and I get that. I totally get that. So I don't usually mention that on other shows. But yeah, and but even if you only stream it, that's cool, you know. And then check out our podcast, the McCaw Podcast Universe. It's where my wife and I discuss film franchises, and our tagline, we exist to prove people wrong when they say sequels are never better than the originals. And we have proven that point many a time. Yeah, I think that's what I got.
That's the pitch. Well, that's great.
Yeah.
Again, I'm a fan of all your work. I'm so glad we're connected, and that I hope we continue to stay connected and collaborate further in the future. But the last thing I'll ask you to do now as we wrap up is, I have a saying on the show. The saying is born out of my now on indefinite hiatus music podcast. I say indefinite hiatus because that's easier than saying it's done and it's never coming back. You know, it's the emotional cushioning that I do every time I bring this up. But we came up with a saying on that show, which is music is life and life is good. It's this idea that as long as you're creating at your core, as long as you're making stuff, even in the hardest of times, it's not that bad because you can get joy from that creation. So if you could say music is life and life is good, we'll wrap up the show.
Music is life, and life is good.
That's it for this episode of CPOV Autographs. Our theme music is by Michael Kill. Our logo was designed by Case Aiken and Joey Amons. If you liked the show, please rate and review wherever you get your podcasts. It's a great way to help us reach more listeners. Questions, comments, or guest recommendations? Email mr.matt.storm@gmail.com or hit us up on Twitter at CPOV Autographs. Thank you so much for listening.
Hey there, Screen Beans. Have you heard about Screen Snark?
Rachel, this is an ad break. They aren't screen beans until they listen to the show.
Fine. Potential Screen Beans. You like movies and TV shows, right?
I mean, who doesn't? Screen Snark is a casual conversation about the movies and television shows that are shaping us as we live our everyday lives.
That's right, Matt. We have a chat with at least one incredible guest every episode, hailing from all walks. We've interviewed chefs,
writers, costumers, musicians,
yoga teachers, comedians, burlesque dancers,
folks in the film and TV industry,
and more.
We'd be delighted for you to join us every other Monday on the Certain POV Podcast Network.
Or wherever you get your podcasts, fresh and tasty off the presses.
What? That's not.
Can I call them Screen Beans now?
Fine.
Screen Beans.
So tune in and we'll see you at the movies or on a couch somewhere.
'Cause you're all Screen Beans now.
You will be mine. Aurora.
CPOV. CertainPOV.com.